welcome back to another episode of Redneck Racing. We're on episode 4 of the Chevelle build. Today's plan is to get the chassis ready for a mock-up block and transmission to get installed. So the first step that we need to do in order to get that done is to get all this front suspension off of the front, figure out how to unbolt these motor mounts that are in here, put the LS swap motor mounts in, and then we'll be able to set a mock-up block and transmission in the chassis. And then once we know where the tail shaft of the transmission is, we can start putting in some of the floor structure. Make sure to subscribe to the channel to continue watching this build. If you haven't seen any of the videos that have gotten us this far, check out those videos. We show you guys the back half install and how we got the body off the frame and all that good stuff. We're trying to get the spindles out, and it turns out when you don't have the weight of a car and a motor and everything on the frame, you can't compress the spring real good. We tried pumping it up with the jack and it just started picking the chassis up and didn't compress the spring. So we needed to add some more weight to the front of the chassis.
Oh, yeah, now it's
tight. Good enough. So we can just carefully take one of these off. There we go.
Perfect.
Well, we got the whole front of the frame stripped down. We're actually gonna pick the whole frame up, carry it right outside, and power wash the whole thing. Figured might as well have a nice clean frame before I start bolting new parts on. So the engine stands, or the chassis side motor mount brackets, are Hooker Blackheart LS swap motor mounts. These are the ones that say they put the LS engine in the factory small block Chevy location. For anyone who's wondering, this here is the part number for these. Basically the bell housing mounting surface stays in the same spot as long as you use a factory LS motor mount. So what I have for the motor mounts are solid BMR F-body motor mounts. The instructions for these say to use an OEM or equivalent 4th gen F-body engine mount. That's basically what we have right here. This is basically going to just be a race car. I figured I'll go with the solid mounts. All right, everybody, we're picking right back up where we left off with the Chevelle. It's been a couple weekends since we've been here working on it. What we're gonna be doing right now is going to pick up some steel tubing for the roll cage. So I got an order placed. Hopefully I got enough. I got a little bit extra because I'm figuring we're gonna screw something up at least once. So got a couple extra feet, or 10 or 20. We're gonna go pick that up right now, see if we can show you guys any of that process, and we'll come back here with the steel and start getting some tubes bent up and put in the chassis.
We just parking under the big crane or what? Oh man.
Does it go down to the last bay, so I'm assuming it means the last crane here.
Probably.
This is pretty cool.
This is really cool. They got steel everywhere. Holy cow, that's a lot.
Do not leave dunnage. I don't know what that means.
I don't know what a dunnage is.
Yeah, this is sick. This is sick. Alright guys, we are back from picking up roll cage tubing. We got the floor off the frame. We're bolting, that's actually a 5.3 block that we're just using for mock-up. That's the Turbo 400 case, got all the guts out of it. We're just gonna pick it up, set it in the frame, put the floor back over top of it, and then we have all of our obstacles, I guess, in the way, and we can start building the floor structure around everything. So here we have our SFI spec book 25.5, and we're trying to figure out what bars we need for the floor, and really all we need is our number 2 inner frame rails, which is these 2 yellow ones here. We need the 6A, 6C, and 6B, and that's pretty much it. We probably are going to need to do something similar to this, where we're going to have to set transmission cross member, or the 6C bar, back. Number 6 bar should be right about here, and that's going to run into the transmission, so we're going to have to step that back to pick up the back of the transmission there, and then come forward again. Then we're probably going to need to put these gussets, although something in the rules said if you have factory stuff you might not need the gussets. If you read the rule in this part here, it says that you don't need the 8A, 8B, or number 4. So yeah, that's kind of what we're looking at right here. We don't need this diagonal, this X in the middle, or that diagonal. And then these are just other pictures of how you can do it. Basically, all the pictures in this book that they show you are kind of recommendations or ideas on how you can do it.
They're more guidelines rather than rules.
The code is more what you'd call guidelines than actual rules.
You need to have the book to read all the words because that's where the real rules are and that's what really matters. All right, so we finally got to bending some tubes. You can actually see here we got one bent already. Now that I think we got this sort of figured out, maybe. I'm going to try and show you guys bending this other tube here. You basically just got to do the exact same thing. And what this tube is for, this is going to be our inner frame rail. So it's going to run underneath the floor here from our, well, it's going to be a number 2B, and it's going to come underneath the floor here, and then it's going to weld on basically right underneath this hole here. So that's our plan. With these two tubes right here, we got to do one for each side, so that's why we're doing two of them. And I'm gonna stuff this in the bender and show you guys a little video of how this bender works. Alright, let's see how we did. Darn near perfect.
It's very close. I got this end pulled tight.
That's good enough for this. Once we get those both fitted up, then we'll tack them in place and start working on 6A and B bar, I think. Alright everybody, I'm laying underneath the car right now. We got both of our number 2 bars tacked in, and we're starting to lay some tape and mock up where we want our 6A, B, and C bars to go. Putting the tape up is a pretty good way to get an idea of where you want your bars to go. You can get your angles in here, like you need to figure out what angle to cope this bar at to this bar. Set your tape up and then measure the angle between the bar and the tape. You can also take a tape measure and measure the length of the tape you have, add a little bit extra, and then that gives you a pretty good idea of how long of a chunk of tube you need to cut and what the angles are. Alright guys, we're both laying underneath the car here. So we're working on getting this diagonal put in right here. The rules say that we don't need this diagonal if we weld our number 2 bars to the factory floor, and we didn't want to try and mess around with welding to the floor, so we're putting these diagonal bars in, and it's going to tie into our seat bar right here. This is like where your crotch strap would go. Okay, so I think we got most of the math done on where we need to cut these axle tubes at for the rear end. The jig that I got for doing this comes with a centering plate. You have to have one of these if you're wanting to do this from scratch, or really if you want to do it at all. You line it up with the right holes here. So I've got it in the F hole for Ford. This is your slot for where the pinion center line is going to be, and the arrow points, so it's on that side of the slot there. So basically you want to figure out where your tires are going to be. I wound up downloading this worksheet from Chris Alston Chassis Works. These are the guys that I got the back half kit from. This is pretty helpful. It gives you all the dimensions you need to know for doing this. What we're figuring out right now is this N and O dimension. Found that dimension to be 15 and 5/8, and then I just measured from this line 15 and 5/8 in each direction, and then I actually measured how much that actually needs to be on each axle tube. So on a Ford 9-inch, the driver's side axle tube is going to be shorter if your pinion is centered. So the driver's side one is 8 3/4, and this one's 11 3/4. So what I'm going to do next is actually take these axle tubes to work and then face them off at length in a lathe so that I know the ends of each of these axle tubes is perfectly straight. We're starting to mock the rear end housing up in the jig. We got a center section and we got the face plate bolted to that. I got the centering pucks put in where the main caps go on and ran the bar all the way through. So now I think I'm just going to double check all the measurements, make sure it actually is the right width, and everything else checks out. I put the housing ends on, and then I also got a tape measure here. I'll butt it up against the puck on that end, and this should be 36 inches, which it is. So my overall rear end width that I want from axle flange to axle flange is 41 inches. On this particular rear end, each axle has a 2.5 inch offset, so it'll be 5 inches longer in reality, so that 36 inches is perfect. That's exactly what we were looking for. So you can see we got the main part of the rear end housing all welded up here. Now we got to weld the back brace on. We need to build a preload jig to make sure that the thing doesn't turn into a Pringle chip when we weld the back brace on. We already know it's kind of doing that a little bit. All right, everybody, we got all of the floor structure in the middle of the car at least tacked in place. Peter's going to be working on that. And what I'm going to be working on is trying to get the rear end housing straight. So you can see the rear end housing right there behind me. And then I've got my uncle's oxyacetylene torch. And what we're going to be trying to do is heat up the axle tubes and get everything to straighten back out. It's not quite straight. This puck should actually just slide right in there. And this side's actually getting pretty good. You can see that I've been working on it a little bit. This side, I haven't touched at all yet. And you can see the gap that's in there. When you heat it up, it's actually gonna make it a little bit worse because as the metal gets hot, it's gonna expand a little bit. But when it cools off, it's gonna contract more than it expands. Very similar principle to weld draw. And you're basically inducing artificial weld draw. So I went to Fleet Farm and picked up this 2-inch hitched receiver. I was looking for 1 1/4 inch because a 2-inch is probably overkill, but this is all they had, so I guess this is what I'm gonna use. That's probably all right. Bigger is better. And I do plan on pulling a trailer with this if I ever do some drag and drive stuff, or I at least want the option available. So I'm gonna put a mark here, go a little bit past this because I'm actually gonna weld a bar through here, cut a hole in here, put a bar through it. So if the hitch sits in there like that, I can reach up underneath through here to put the pin in, and then the hitch hides behind the license plate. I want to be able to completely hide the hitch behind the license plate back there if I ever want to run the car without a hitch on it or without the parachute on it. The other reason for having the hitch up higher in the bumper instead of mounting it completely below the bumper is that you want the parachute pull point to be more in line with the center of gravity of the car. If you have the parachute mounted too low, two things will happen. Number one, the parachute will drag on the ground in the shutdown. And two, it'll actually pick the back of the car up when it blossoms. If the parachute's mounted down low, it has leverage on the bottom of the car picking it up. General rule of thumb, the center of gravity of your car is roughly at camshaft height. So there's our 2-inch hitch receiver. We got it welded to this bar primarily that actually goes all the way through the hitch. That should absolutely not go anywhere. And then we also have these bars triangulating to that bar. That should be a very sturdy place for the parachute. All right, everybody, we are about to do something that I've been waiting to do for a very long time. I'm pretty sure we finally have enough structure in the back half that we can successfully cut away the factory frame and not worry about anything shifting. The frame is pretty much done. I don't know what to say. I don't really know what to do with my hands.
Be good just to hold them down by your side. Yeah, great.
But frame is done. And I think now we need to start getting the rear end kind of mocked up underneath here. And I need to design some four-link brackets. And then we can roll the chassis back underneath the car and start working on the rest of the roll cage. So what I'm going to be working on tonight is putting the spindles on these new control arms right here, just enough so that we can put some front tires on this, and then I'm basically planning on picking the whole frame up like a wheelbarrow, rolling it outside, spinning it around, and then coming back underneath the body with it. Another thing with these TRZ control arms that I figure I'd mention, just in case it helps anybody else out, is which one goes on which side. I found a forum that said this limiter bolt should be biased towards the front. On the bottom, there's like this brace that's on one side right there that you can kind of see. So you want that brace biased towards the back. That's how you set up control arms, at least on a first gen GM A body. It should be the same, 64 to 67, probably 64 to 72, but just thought I'd throw this in here just in case it helps any of you guys out. My Uncle Jim's coming over with his forklift, and we'll hopefully be able to put the cherry picker on the front end here and the forklift in the back and be able to pick this up somehow, and then somehow we'll get the frame situated underneath. Well guys, unfortunately my battery died on my phone in the middle of that time lapse, so you guys didn't get to see the body come down on the frame. I think my grandma took some videos of that, so I probably threw those in after the time lapse. Hopefully you guys are able to see some of that. But anyways, behind me here we have the bodies down on the frame. So huge thank you to my uncle and my grandpa for helping me set this up on here. We can now start getting the rest of the roll cage fitted inside the body, and we can start playing with some of the suspension geometry back here, get that situated the way we want it. We can start getting wheel tubs fitted in here, get some of the tin work done in the back. We can work on some of the stuff in the front and get the steering column put in. Some of that stuff we might not do because we are probably going to end up pulling the body back off again to finish welding everything. This is where I'm going to end off today's video. Make sure you guys subscribe to the channel, keep watching the content. We have a lot more stuff coming for this car. Whole roll cage build. If you guys want to see how to put a 25.5 roll cage into a 67 or a 66 Chevelle, keep watching. Make sure to subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.